How did one woman bring the most powerful men in Rome to their knees without ever picking up a sword? Between the gold of the Nile River and the sneaky games of the Senate, a person rose up who stood up to empires, charmed generals, and wrote her name in a way that would last forever. Cleopatra, the last queen of Egypt. But behind the famous story is a tale of cleverness, power, and sadness that not many people dare to tell. Today, we are going to take you right into the heart of ancient Egypt to find out how one woman became a goddess and a legend. So get ready, because today we are going to uncover how Cleopatra won over not just kingdoms, but all of time itself. But before we start, subscribe to the GeoMind channel and tell us in the comments which other people from history you would like to see here. Let's travel back in time, on the shores of the Nile Delta. In a city built from the big dreams of Alexander the Great, a little girl came into the world not knowing that one day she would be remembered as a living goddess. Her name was Cleopatra VII, Philip. Her destiny was to stand up to Rome and to time itself. Alexandria was not just any normal city. It was a place full of knowledge, a meeting point of different cultures, a shining Greek-style jewel sitting in the middle of the Egyptian desert. Built by Alexander the Great and ruled by the Ptolemaic dynasty, this big city was full of energy, run by Greek kings who for many generations had ruled ancient Egypt as outsiders living on sacred land. Right in the middle of that history, caught between two different worlds, Cleopatra was born, and from very early on, she showed that she was not going to be like everyone else. While the Ptolemies before her spoke Greek and looked down on the language of regular Egyptian people, Cleopatra broke that pattern. She was the first person in her whole family line to learn Egyptian, to speak it well, to look her people in the eyes and talk to them in their very own language. It was a smart political move, yes, but it also meant something bigger. She did not just want to be in charge. She wanted to truly belong. From a very young age, she was trained to be a real heir to the throne. She was surrounded by smart teachers and learned about philosophy, math, politics, and the stars. She was no normal kid, but a sharp mind being polished like a piece of steel. People say she could speak at least 7 languages, which made her a really strong planner in a time when power also lived in the words people said. But her childhood was not peaceful at all. The Ptolemaic royal court was like a field full of hidden mines, full of betrayals, secret plans, and out-of-control ambition. Fathers against sons, brothers against sisters. Being born royal did not keep you safe. It just gave you the right to play a very dangerous game. Cleopatra learned early that to stay alive on Egypt's throne, you had to know when to strike and when to be charming. While her character was slowly being shaped in the dark corners of the palace, the whole world was watching. Rome was starting to stretch its arms into the eastern Mediterranean Sea, and Egypt, with all its gold, its food supply, and its mystery, was the prize everyone wanted most. Nobody guessed that a young princess born in the middle of a fading Greek-style empire was meant to change the whole course of history. Cleopatra was still just a kid, but her legend had already started. What if real power did not come from armies, but from being smart? In the heart of a city where books were worth more than gold and ideas were more dangerous than swords, Cleopatra grew up surrounded by the wisdom of the ancient world. Alexandria was more than just a capital city. It was a safe place for learning. And there, between marble columns and old papyrus scrolls that had lasted forever, a queen started building her legend. Just a short walk from the royal palace was the greatest treasure of the ancient world, the Library of Alexandria. That amazing place of knowledge held writings from every culture people knew about, from Indian books about medicine to Greek ideas about life, from Babylonian math to Egyptian poems. In that world where the mind was respected just like the gods, Cleopatra soaked up every word and every idea, as if she somehow knew that her life would one day depend on how sharp her brain was. She was not just pretty, she had a strategic mind that could hold its own in debates with philosophers, talk side by side with astronomers, and speak to diplomats in their own home language. People said she knew Greek, Egyptian, Latin, Hebrew, Arabic, Arabic, Persian, and possibly even more. In a world where friendships and deals were made through talking, Cleopatra did not need anyone to translate for her. She herself was her greatest weapon, but her hunger for more did not stop at knowledge. From early on, she understood how powerful religion could be as a symbol. By connecting herself to Isis, the great divine mother of ancient Egypt, Cleopatra did more than just put a crown on her head and call herself queen. She lifted herself up to the level of a goddess. The message was very clear. She was not just a ruler. She was the living reincarnation of a god on earth. For a people who were used to worshiping holy figures, that image was far more powerful than any army could ever be. Her enemies looked down on her. They thought that a woman, even a smart and educated one, could not survive the rough and brutal game of running an empire. But Cleopatra understood something they did not. The mind controls the sword, and a symbol controls the empire. Every word she spoke, every move she made, every alliance she formed was thought through very carefully. In a world run by men and controlled by violence, she chose the path of smart thinking, mystery, and careful influence. And while the whole world watched her with curiosity, Cleopatra had already started moving her pieces on the giant chessboard of history. She did not just want to rule Egypt, she wanted to stand up against Rome. And to do that, it was not enough to just be a queen. She had to become a myth. But what happens when a brilliant mind meets the most powerful man in the whole world? In Rome, they had everything except Egypt. And Egypt, even though it was slowly fading, still had exactly what the Romans wanted most: grain, treasure, and legend. Because of fights inside the palace, a civil war, and threats coming from outside the country, Cleopatra was pushed off her own throne by her younger brother, with whom she used to share power. But she was not about to become just a tiny, forgotten note in history. While she was living in exile out in the desert, fate, or maybe her own cleverness, gave her a very special chance. Rome had shown up in Alexandria, and leading its army was the most powerful man in the Western world, Julius Caesar. What happened next was no accident. It was strategy. The legend says that Cleopatra had herself secretly smuggled in to meet Caesar by hiding inside a rolled-up carpet. It was a dramatic entrance that started one of the most fascinating meetings in all of history. But what truly grabbed the Roman general's attention was not her looks, even though poets would later say so. It was her intelligence, her fearlessness, and the big vision she had for her empire. Cleopatra was not looking for a romantic partner. She was looking for an ally. Julius Caesar, who had been through many battles and many betrayals, immediately saw how valuable this young queen was. With his help and support, Cleopatra took back her throne, and Egypt shone brightly once again, though now it lived under Rome's watchful shadow. What started out as a political friendship slowly became something personal, a strong and intense connection between two ambitious and dangerous people. The scandal back in Rome was enormous. How could their most famous general have a child with a foreign queen? How could he honor her with a statue of Cleopatra inside a Roman temple, as if she were one of their own Roman goddesses? But Caesar did not care much about what people thought. He was completely drawn in by her. Egypt and Rome, connected by a romance that made no sense when you looked at the map. Cleopatra did not just find a place in Caesar's heart. She also traveled all the way to Rome, dressed in the full glory of an Eastern goddess. Her presence was so powerful and commanding that it left the Roman senators completely stunned. But with great power come many enemies, and Caesar already had way too many of those. In 44 BC, Caesar was murdered inside the Roman Senate. Cleopatra, heartbroken but not beaten, made her way back to Egypt. Her son Caesarion was now a living symbol of the bond between two great powers. But Rome did not forgive, and Rome did not forget. She had lost the person who protected her, but she had not lost the game, because while a new player was rising to power back in Rome, Cleopatra was already getting ready for her next move. What if her next ally was not only younger, but also a little easier to influence? As the sound of the knives still seemed to hang in the air of the Roman Senate, and Caesar's blood had barely dried on the marble floor, power in Rome turned into a game with no rules at all. Octavian, who was Caesar's adopted son, and Mark Antony, who had been Caesar's loyal general, fought each other for control over the future of the empire. Meanwhile, far to the south, Cleopatra watched everything closely and waited. She knew Rome was hurting. She also knew that when something is hurting, it opens up doors. Mark Antony was impulsive, brave, and always hungry for glory. He was the complete opposite of Julius Caesar. He did not have Caesar's cold and careful thinking, but he had the kind of charisma that made soldiers want to follow him into battle. And when he needed money, soldiers, and a home base in the eastern part of the world, he looked toward Egypt. Cleopatra welcomed him not just as a queen greeting a visitor, but as a living goddess receiving someone into her world. History tells us that her arrival in the city of Tarsus looked like something straight out of a myth. A golden boat, purple sails, sweet-smelling perfume floating through the air, and music that sounded like it was coming from the sky. Mark Antony was totally unprepared for that. Nobody would have been. The effect was instant. He was completely captivated. But Cleopatra was not searching for love. She was searching for power, and Antony, with all his ambition and all his needs, was the perfect partner to help protect Egypt and challenge Rome. Together they built a relationship that mixed pleasure and politics. They threw themselves into excess, huge celebrations, and alliances that left the Roman Senate completely shocked. Yet, while they were busy with feasts and big promises, the tension with Octavian kept growing. Rome was not going to put up with a foreign queen getting involved in its business, especially one who called herself the new Isis and dared to try to divide the empire alongside her lover. Octavian was smart and patient, and he built a very dangerous story, the story of a sneaky queen who had put a spell on a great Roman hero. To the Roman people, Cleopatra became the enemy from the east, a symbol of too much luxury and a real danger to Roman civilization. The break between them was unavoidable. War broke out. Cleopatra and Mark Antony went up against Octavian's forces in the famous Battle of Actium. But what was supposed to show everyone their strength turned into a tragedy. They were outmatched and surrounded, so they ran away, and the dream of building a whole new empire fell apart completely. The Roman world no longer belonged to Caesar's line, and for Cleopatra, that could only mean one thing. The end was getting close. What does a queen do when even the gods seem to have turned their backs on her? Rome had already made up its mind. There was no room for a foreign queen in its new world order. And even though Cleopatra still wore gold and still spoke like a goddess, she knew her whole world was falling apart. Egypt, the very last piece of the Greek-style age, stood completely alone. After losing at Actium, Mark Antony and Cleopatra went back to Alexandria, a city that had once shined like a beacon of knowledge and was now getting ready to burn. They were surrounded by Octavian's army, let down by their allies, and it seemed like even the gods had left them. The two lovers had to face their fate like characters in a tragic story. Antony, filled with despair, received false news that Cleopatra had died. With no more hope left inside him, he fell on his own sword. He was badly wounded and was carried to her side. It is said that he died in her arms, wrapped in silk and tears, while the palace around them seemed to turn to symbolic ashes. It was the end of the general, but it was not yet the end of the queen. Cleopatra, clever right up until her very last moments, tried to make a deal with Octavian. She offered him riches, power, and even her own life, but none of it worked. Octavian was not after gold. He wanted the ultimate symbol that he had won. He wanted Cleopatra in chains, being paraded through the streets of Rome in his victory parade. But she was never, ever going to let that happen. According to the accounts people left behind, dressed in her royal clothes and wearing the symbols of Isis, Cleopatra locked herself inside her mausoleum with two servants who had stayed loyal to her. And there, surrounded by myth and serpents, she chose how her story would end. Some say she used poison. Others say it was an asp, a sacred cobra that gave her the fatal bite. What we know for sure is that she died the same way she had lived, as her own boss, thinking everything through. new and wrapped in mystery. With her death, the Ptolemaic dynasty came to an end. Egypt stopped being a kingdom and became just another province of Rome. Her son, Caesarion, was killed. Her treasures were stolen. Her palace torn apart. But Octavian, who would soon become Augustus, knew deep down that he had lost to something that could never truly be conquered, a kind of eternal symbolic power. Cleopatra, the last queen of Egypt, had woven her legend so tightly and so powerfully that not even Rome could scratch her out of people's memories. It was not just the end of a woman, it was the end of an entire era. But can death really put out the fire of a myth? Rome won. The armies marched across the sands of the Nile River. Egypt became just another shiny jewel in the empire's collection. Yet among the ruins of robbed palaces and quiet temples, one figure absolutely refused to disappear. Cleopatra. The winners get to write history. And Octavian, who was now the very first Roman emperor, Augustus, made sure he was the one shaping the image of the queen he had defeated. In the official records, she was painted as a dangerous seductress, a foreign woman who had corrupted two great Roman men. Her cleverness was rewritten as treachery. Her power was called manipulation. But the truth, as it always is way more complicated and way more fascinating than that. Cleopatra was not just a lover. She was an incredible strategist, an educated ruler, a woman who stood up against the greatest power of her time using intelligence, smart diplomacy, and boldness. While others ruled with swords, she ruled with symbols. While others wanted to dominate, she wanted to survive and leave something lasting behind. As the centuries went by, her image took on many different shapes. She was shown as a goddess, a sorceress, a hero, a martyr, a symbol of the mysterious East, of women rising up, of tragic love. Writers, painters, filmmakers, and thinkers reinvented her over and over again. Cleopatra did not die inside her tomb. She was reborn inside the world's imagination. No other Egyptian pharaoh has stayed alive in people's memories the way she has, not because of battles she won, but because of something far more powerful, her incredible ability to turn history into myth. Today, more than 2,000 years later, we are still completely fascinated by her. We wonder what her face actually looked like, whether she really used poison, whether she truly loved Mark Antony with her whole heart. But above all, we ask ourselves how one single woman managed to stand up against the greatest empire in all of history and still come out of it immortalized, because death can stop a heartbeat, but it cannot stop a legend. Thank you for watching all the way to the very end. If you enjoyed this video and you love this kind of content, subscribe to the channel so you never miss the videos coming up next and discover even more amazing stories from history. See you in the next video.